called ScreenCloud. And he actually focused on 80% of the workers who are not sitting in front of a screen all day. And when I read these numbers, I thought, hey, this is amazing. I didn't expect that there's so many people not working with a computer. I mean, we all live in our bubble. We knowledge workers, we stare at the screen all day. But actually, we are a minority. The majority of people, they don't work in front of the screen, and they need systems and tools to support them. They need communication channels. They need ways of getting information for their daily work. And this is where Mark comes in place. Hey, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's really a big number. So when I heard this the first time, I said, hey, really 80%? I mean, as I said in my intro, we all live in our bubble, we all are knowledge workers, and we look at our screens, at our mobiles, at our iPads, and we think everyone is doing this. But in fact, as you said, the majority of people, they don't do this, and they have a need like we have Slack, we have Teams, we have email and these different channels for communication, and you solve this problem for the 80%. So What are you doing with
Well, I suppose the irony is that they're not looking at screens, and I'm trying to change that and make them look at screens. So I suppose I'll just slightly zoom out and just explain. So ScreenCloud is a digital signage platform. So our kind of mission really is to make screens and networks of screens be more useful than they historically have been. So I'll probably just start with why that technology isn't very good, and then we can go into exactly explaining why this use case is so important for the deskless and frontline workers. So the technology of screens, we all use them, and my dad got his first TV in his family home in the 1950s. But so it's probably the original screen technology, really, before anything else. And yet, actually, what goes on inside your screen hasn't really changed that much, really, since the 1980s or 90s. We have sort of smart TV, but it's not really that smart. The experience on a screen compared to the web experience you have on laptops and phones is just not comparable. And so the technology hasn't really held up that well over time. And what we're basically trying to do is kind of level that up, really, and bring screens back into play as an internet connected device. Now, the environment that we saw that most needed this was in environments where they have predominantly deskless or frontline workers. Now, when we start thinking about that, we still think, okay, that's just a few people. But if you really scan the number of industries that covers, you're looking at everything from education, healthcare, retail workers, hospitality, construction, manufacturing, logistics, transportation. Actually, it's most of the industries that we rely on for society just to function. Yes. And in our tech world, yes, you're right. As your intro said, we do live in this bubble where, if anything, we've got the opposite problem. We have a fire hose of content coming at us every day. All these notifications, our Slack or Teams, as you said, email, various other means of getting communicated to. If anything, we complain that we get too much and that we are drowning in content. But if you go and speak to someone working on the front line, their communication channels, again, have not updated much beyond pen and paper. And maybe it's a printout of an email stuck on a notice board, or quite frequently word of mouth from the line manager. But on shift work, line managers are not always present. Also, it can be very inconsistent information coming through. The delivery of that information will vary based on the individual and if the person's even there. So often what we hear, and there's so many surveys, if anyone wants to independently look all this up, trust me, you'll hear the same thing. Almost every survey is they often feel quite disengaged from the company they work for because they don't even really know, what's the point of what we're doing? How are we making a difference? They quite often have an us and them issue where obviously the people in HQ are more like knowledge workers, rarely visiting, rarely getting out there. COVID, they couldn't do that at all. And probably a bit of kind of a sense of we're out here doing grafting on the front line. Those guys back in head office, sit in their meetings and just look at spreadsheets.
Sit in a cozy office.
Yeah. Now the reality is basically, everyone thinks the other has it easier or worse, but the problem is that they just don't understand each other. And the communication patterns that we're using is, it's basically manual and really out of date. I mean, the crazy thing is most of them don't have an email address. And yet when you ask, what's the number one communication channel you use for your deskless workforce, The answer is email. So what happens is they email the store or the store manager, and then it's down to that person to look at that inbox and deal with it in their own way. And
he
deeply
prints it out and hands the printout to to your workers.
And, and you've even got like a really bigger problem. I'll throw one in there, which, I mean, there's so many other problems that we have to deal with. It's not just about communication. It's also about operational display of information, because most of the environments that people work in, they are actually internet connected. Now, there's a lot of internet and SaaS systems that are probably being used to make the environment function, but there's no visualization layer unless you have a laptop or a phone. So everything's connected around you. Things are happening, but we need to see stuff in order to respond to it. So again, that's why screens are the most natural medium in those environments, and that's why we focus there, because traditionally you wouldn't be able to do that. And most people have tried. They put screens up there, but they're pretty dumb and useless. We're trying to make them smart. But the really interesting issue we hit is, I'll take one example. One of the big issues, say, hitting logistics, for example, right, is it's very, very hard now to actually recruit truck drivers, because people aren't entering the industry. They think it's going to be fully automated in the future. It's actually a pretty hard job. You have to do long hours and quite uncomfortable. Like, it's basically not a very attractive job. And we need more and more of it because we're moving things around even more than ever. And so one of the issues we see is kind of the churn or retention of staff being a really big problem. Often there are opportunities for kind of upskilling and better roles and things like that inside of those industries. Often the line manager will suppress that opportunity to their best people because they don't want to lose them to other teams, because those people have actually helped them hit their results. And it's so hard to find new people. They don't want them either getting promoted up or moved over to another location or something, because they don't want to lose them. So what happens is that person will actually then go to another company because they'll see a job advertised, which is a better promotion for them. So it's easier for them to find out about opportunities in other companies than it is in their own, because they're being quite often suppressed or not talked about. Yeah. What we're trying to do is then, we understand why, but what we're trying to do is then using a screens channel is to basically advertise these things so that they don't kind of fall by the wayside, like that. So there's a huge number of problems that we're trying to help solve there.
Completely makes sense. Yeah. I mean, we communicate, as you said, we communicate so much in our bubble. Yeah, we get so much information, but how do you want to build a relationship with a coworker if you cannot communicate with this person? Yeah, if he's on a truck all day and he gets his assignment in the morning, he has to drive somewhere and then he delivers the stuff and that's it. There's no real communication, and this is where you come in place. So how does it work? Do you build your whole network? Is this a kind of an infrastructure with screens where you can channel different informations to different areas, different screens, or how does it work?
Yeah. So there's several layers to the onion, I suppose I'd say. So at the beginning, at the lowest level, what we're really trying to do is help an organization, and we're working primarily in partnering with the IT department on this, to take usually often an existing network of screens that may not be used or not being used very well. And then obviously it usually expands as well. And say, okay, look, let's get this whole network of screens under proper control. So let's integrate that back into the enterprise IT network and give tools to IT, which means they can remotely manage this whole network without actually having to be on the ground. So that's the first thing we do, is just sort of stabilize everything, get them connected, get them in line with IT policies, and give them a sense of control that this is working. Because actually, often screens break a lot. And if you go to the airport, you'll see so many black screens, blue screen of death, that kind of thing all around you. Connectivity is quite a big problem. There's not normally, even though it's internet connected, normally, a screen will go on that peripheral wall. It actually doesn't get very good internet connection. So there's a whole load of reasons why screens break, and it always lands on IT to go out in the field and fix them, which is very costly and slow. So the first thing we try and do is massively increase that reliability and put more tools back into the hands of IT. Then beyond that, we partner with other stakeholders in the business around the content and messaging that they want to get out there. So that could be everything from internal comms, HR, operations, compliance, and health and safety, which is another huge part of what we do. We will partner with all of those various teams and departments and help them get their content out onto screen. Now, our mission isn't really we have a content management system that allows you to upload content, files and images and all of that sort of thing. But actually, what we're pushing customers to think more about is how to do this in an automated way. So Another problem you've got with screens is most people don't have big content departments. So if you're putting images and videos up there, they're going to get out of date very, very quickly. And it takes quite a lot of effort to make a video, right? And most people don't have those skills anyway, or they can, but they can't do it frequently enough. Now, if you think about it, the people in those environments are going to see that screen maybe 20 or 30 times a day. And if they're going to rely on that screen to be a single source of truth for their communication, that means it has to be up to date. And the only real way to do that is to use that, to have basically data feeds and use that as a digital web experience, not a playlist of images and videos. So our hypothesis, and this is proving to be true, is that content already lives inside of the business, right? It lives inside of Teams and SharePoint and various other systems. What we want to try and do is let's pull that content out of that, reformat it in a visually correct manner, on-brand manner, up to those screens, and use automation to do that rather than relying on individuals to manage it themselves. So what we're really trying to do is bring that web experience to screens that enables that to happen, which means ideally about 85% of the content is being automated from the system of origin where it normally would live, whether that's an HR system or an intranet or anything like that.
Is it only automation, or is there also some artificial intelligence collecting the right type of information for a certain topic? Is it that sophisticated?
Not quite yet. But we are sort of working towards that. So one of the things we hit, when you take a lot of feeds of information, obviously the frequency of those feeds can be quite different. So some are updated fairly infrequently, others are updated all the time. But actually, the weighting may be different, whereas the importance of something might be really high, even if it's infrequent. And over here might be just a lot of noise. So we are building out systems. I'm reluctant to call it AI, but it is intelligent software that sort of helps weight and prioritize content. At the moment, most of the scheduling that we do is done based on kind of a time-based schedule that's dictated usually by someone, in HQ. And that's actually problematic because they're imagining, I'd like these people to see this message next Tuesday at 9 a.m. But how do they know that that's the right time? That's the right traffic flow to hit. They're not there on the ground. They don't understand. Actually, the shift might have started at 9 a.m. It might be that screen, if it's in the break room, for example, that there's no one there, because, they're already on the floor. So, but maybe, 8:37 a.m. is the peak moment to catch people's imagination. So we're working on ways to make these screens more intelligent, because screens right now are so dumb. They don't give you anything back. I mean, it will tell you whether it played or not, but it doesn't tell you anything else. Yeah. I mean, honestly, this technology has been left in the dark ages, and there's no other digital product that doesn't give you a feedback loop. Yeah, unfortunately, I am, and basically that's kind of how we stumbled on this whole industry in the first place. Is we're web developers by trade. We've been me and my co-founder have been building web products since we were teenagers in the 90s. We're the children of the internet in that respect. We came across digital signage and screens, and our world doesn't exist there. It historically hasn't happened, and so we felt that this is going to become a huge software problem, because that's basically what always happens. Everything becomes a software problem eventually. I can give you an example as to why. So when I got my first official job after university in the year 2000, right? And I started actually in IT consultancy, so kind of in corporate IT. Now, I worked one of the big
brilliant time, by the way. I also started before the year 2000, and this was the golden time of IT. I always say everyone who could spell IT could get a high-paid job.
Well, I think we have to thank the Y2K bug for that. Everyone thought that the bug to collapse the world.
The non-existing bug, because nothing happened.
No, nothing happened, but everyone got recruited. So we all end up getting trained in IT, and it was pretty useful. So a throwback to the people of this golden era who are still going. So back then, so you'll remember as well as I do then. So video conferencing was just really becoming a thing. Now, video conferencing back then was super expensive hardware in a boardroom, which could enable you to speak with other people in another boardroom somewhere else in the country or the world. Now, this was game changing because you didn't have to just constantly be on planes, but it was really an executive level toy, right? but a very, very useful. Toys may be a bit, dismissive. It was super useful. But ultimately, it was a hardware thing. You had to be professionally installed, quite complicated to set up, spend a lot of money on it, but it was all worth it to lower that exec travel. But basically, video conferencing, no one really talks about hardware anymore. Now, yes, you may have still those kind of big corporate installations, but we're using a browser. We're using the native camera in our laptop or phone, maybe a cheap webcam, but basically it's a software issue. Now, we apply the same thing to screens. Screens, historically, to do them professionally, the ones you'll see in big outdoor advertising, retail, all of those things, very, very expensive to do. They look beautiful often, very high definition, very well installed, etc. And most of the industry that we're from, they make most of their money selling in very high-end hardware into these kind of environments. They're not really interested in just putting a regular TV on a wall and just using it in a comms way, because most of their margin is coming from basically expensive commercial grade hardware. What we're basically saying is, okay, that's very appropriate in certain environments, like Dubai Airport, Fifth Avenue, all of that kind of thing. But what about just regular companies just using screens just as a medium, just some kind of value? Well, they don't want to really do that because there's no money there. But someone like us, we don't care about hardware. We're not a hardware. We're about software working on existing forms of hardware, whether that be very low grade, cheap stuff like Amazon Fire TV sticks, $40 devices, all the way up to the premium stuff. We're basically looking at it through the lens of software developers saying, as hardware gets more and more sophisticated and cheaper over time, so the kind of the Moore's law sort of approach, which is happening, ultimately this whole industry needs to transition to be a software first issue. And at the moment, it's still considered hardware first. Like, people consider, how do I make this work is their primary concern, not how can I make this effective? And that's our primary concern. So we're drawing people over that way. And every year that goes by, it gets easier and easier because of the nature of the hardware cycles that we go through. But that's why we focus away from like high-end installation stuff, because that's well covered. And there's brilliant, talented people out there doing that. But who's dealing with it just in these normal use cases? Why are we not using screens more powerfully in our environments? And it doesn't just have to be the deskless workforce. It's just that that's the environment that needs us most today. We want to solve it for everyone, but right there, we're replacing a notice board, and that's crazy in this day and age.
Especially here in Germany, there are quite a lot of very established ways of communication. I mean, when the pandemic started, hospitals still faxed information around, this is unbelievable, but there's so much work to do.
Oh, sorry, I was going to say, I think the pandemic did shine a light on a lot of this. And I think, so many, obviously, it's, what we've all been through in those years is so awful. But what it has done is shine a light on areas of society or industry which we've completely taken for granted or just left to rot and not really been very inclusive about. And I think, this would be my pitch to the tech industry that I'm from, that I spent pretty much until recently, my whole career being a part of. I think we should be starting to think about going into the rooms and the communities where there aren't 1,000 other developers like us sat there anymore. When I go to a conference from the digital signage world, there's very few people like me there. It's getting increasingly so. When I first walked in, I felt like an alien and like, oh God, what am I doing here? This is not my world. And then I realized, that's why I'm here. Like, we need to go into places where it's not our world. If you go to a conference and all you see is people who could basically be you, then you're in the wrong room, I think. Exactly. And actually, this whole tech market crash, so much of tech SaaS is tech selling into tech. We build SaaS for ourselves. We build SaaS for our own communities. We're the minority. We've got to remember that we're the minority here. Like, let's open our horizons.
You are completely right. I mean, we produce services for the like-minded people, for the other tech guys who use a SaaS product, use a browser-based application. But as you said, basically the people who are the foundation of our society. The workers in a hospital, on a fire brigade, whatever, they are completely left out. And we see this quite a lot nowadays, that they drop out of these roles, they take on different jobs. And we really feel this increasing demand for this kind of people, because you cannot find builders anymore. You cannot find people who fix your door or whatever, This is really creating a problem. And when we can make their world better, and integrating them into our communication flow, this is definitely the right way to do.
Well, I think what's interesting is if society keeps talking about like what it values, and I think over the last sort of 20 years, the narrative has very much been towards knowledge work. Then eventually the people who are kind of effectively being micro ignored by every statement where we just talk about, we make these sweeping statements about how we're all connected these days and we're all doing this. Like we make these great sweeping statements in media and stuff like that. Those people will feel marginalized. And if people feel marginalized, eventually they walk away. I mean, it's just inevitable. And then suddenly we're left going, oh yeah, but who's going to do all this stuff? And you're like, well, it's the guys you've been ignoring. Look, and I'll hold myself guilty as charged as well. Like the reason I'm, ringing this bell isn't because I figured it out myself. It's because I just happened to end up in an industry kind of by accident, and then coming across this use case where people really needed this. And I went, oh my God, like, I had my eyes opened by my customers and the stories of them, because, I'm not from their world either. And sometimes I feel like a massive fraud, I'll be honest, because I think, mainly we work in America. Most of our customers are in America at the moment. Like, who's this English guy? Like, telling frontline workers in North Carolina like how to make life better. It seems ridiculous, but it's kind of how it's that awkward marriage, but it's working. But I suppose maybe being completely independent of it, that's where I can just look at how we can help. But I think the other thing we also need to remember is just by putting a digital channel in there, it doesn't necessarily solve the problem. Like a lot of the really deep-rooted issues are not just in communication, but also in how they're treated, how they're paid, how they're the circumstances of their work. And obviously there's only so much we can do to affect that. But what we can at least do is create an honest channel of knowledge flow and bring everyone at least up to date with the same information. So if everyone's getting the same information, at least everyone's starting from the same point. And that's a good start point. Obviously I would love for things to improve much beyond that, but we also have to be conscious, especially when I'm selling into my customers, that we're not going to change the world completely, but we've got to make it a hell of a lot better.
What would interest me? I mean, screen is one-way communication. Yeah. So, what do you say when they ask, okay, how can they communicate backwards? How could they answer, or how could they reach out to the content providers? Yeah. How could they engage with the content? Is there anything in the pipeline where you say, okay, this is the back channel?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if it is just a one-way communication, I think it could be considered like a corporate propaganda channel, and it would actually it would be more damaging than useful. Yeah. I think another interesting kind of result of the pandemic is the resurgence of the good old-fashioned QR code. Now, you're my generation of IT, so you'll remember when this was a big thing in the West, at least. Yeah. I mean, in Asia, QR codes have always been big, but in the West, I think it kind of bubbled up around 2007, 2008. I think Pepsi started putting it on a can, and I think at one point you could make a little animation jump out of the can or something, but basically it never took off. But then QR code technology is actually pretty useful, just because it's now native into our phones. So you put up the camera, QR code launches you, either deep links you into an app or something like that. So there is a kind of now a reasonably natural, well understood sort of call to action that a non-interactive screen, which is what most screens are, could actually do. And we would highly encourage that. And really, the way I think of the screen is the screen's not really there to do all of the job. It's really, if we think about it, sort of, not many people are going to go up to the screen at work and just stand there and just like go, hit me with all your content, right? It's going to be a glance. It's going to be something you see as you're walking by. It's something you're referring to. It might catch your eye. The screen is there to be a prompt for action. And I often say it's often a prompt for human action. So let's give an example. Like quite often what we do is like employee recognition. So let's say it's a work anniversary and someone's been in the company 5 years or just been recently promoted. And then you see that person in the cafeteria later on. You might go up and say, hey, congratulations. That's amazing. Or I didn't realize you've been here that long. That's so cool. Like it's a small thing, but it was the prompt from the screen gave you the information to go and do it. Maybe it was a piece of data and you're like, why are so few, deliveries coming in this week? What's going on? Well, we've got 4 trucks in maintenance and we're just down. Oh my God, right. Is there something we can do to help? Like, how can we speed this up? It's about creating real things happening in the real world, and not just digital things, but also human things. So long as the screen is kind of like getting it out there and saying, here's something you should think about, and then here's what to do next, whether it be a digital call to action or even just more often than not, I would think probably a physical one, go and see someone, go and talk about it. It's raising the alarm to agree. And sometimes literally it's raising the alarm. We do emergency stuff as well. So yeah, it is all about kind of prompting that. And then the other thing I'd add is mostly we're working with the subconscious mind, not the conscious mind. So when we get a notification on your phone, you're never going to reread a notification typically, but it's going to be a straight into your brain. Think about me now. Again, with a big luminous box on a wall that you're glancing at constantly, but not necessarily always conscious of. You'd be amazed how much information you're pulling into your brain. I think it's like over 90% of all cognition is subconscious.
Yep,
and
exactly.
Again, we're sort of.
You might be manipulated,
Well, yeah, I know it gets a little bit scary here, but that's not what we're attempting to do. But it's easier to recall information because it's subconsciously gone into your mind than it is that one time you saw a notification where you might have been in a rush and it passed you by, and you've completely forgotten to action something. So we have our role to play. I'm obviously a huge proponent of the technology and of the medium, but I also am completely conscious of like what it can and can't do. And if anything, I usually have to talk customers back from kind of being too advanced. The reality is that doing anything at scale is challenging. So even if it's just as simple as getting more people to fill in and take advantage of their benefits, or to fill in an HR form by the end of the week, and you might get like normally 25% response, that kind of stuff. If we can make that 40%, if we can just nudge that in the right direction, get the recall rates of data and information up just a little bit, then we're providing massive value at scale. And it's a super effective medium for doing so.
And as you said, I mean, if you work primarily in the US, I mean, they have this great resignation. Where so many people left their jobs, and if you can help the companies to engage more with the workforce, I mean, then you also create a massive value at scale. I mean, we're doing a lot of team development and mentoring, and what we hear from our clients and when we do surveys among the people is that they miss recognition. I mean, there's something simple that they get recognized for the work they provide and the value they create. And this is also around knowledge workers. This is the number one which they are looking for. And if you say, hey, let's put this employee at the screen, recognize him for being there for 5 years or for achieving enormous success. These are small things which doesn't cost you anything, but really create a big impact on your workforce, on the person, individual person, but also on the other person. They see that you as an employer, you care.
It is very easy. Yet it's so poorly done at the moment. But the reality is, a big screen up in a public space, we all feel that kid inside of ours, which is like, oh look, Mum and Dad, I'm on stage, I'm up there. Like we all feel it, and we know it because our mind recognizes that this is a large thing, screen, or even if it was opposed to it, the impact would be the same if it was a printout. But it's in front of all this audience. Anything large is given prominence. If something's large and big in front of you, it's usually an indication that we want you to look at this. And so again, if you're basically saying, we recognize you in this large, emphatic way, then you feel recognized. It's just how it works. It's a very basic kind of core human thing. And yeah, you're right. Like, I'll give you a good example as well. We have a customer called Clayton Homes out in the US, and they build houses, like I think they're prefab houses. I think it's a big thing in Germany as well. What they do is in the factories, they show the people who are going to live in that house on the screen. Like, so when you're building it, you're like, this is the retirement home for John and Gladys, like, and you see the people you're building for, and you get a sense of like, right, we're putting this together for them, for their family, for their dream, for whatever it might be. Like, how powerful is that to actually get a sense of the work you're doing today is helping them in the future? And yes, okay, we're making money out of it and all of those other things, but that's how society
but it's
works. That's how the
purpose.
economy works. But everyone is ultimately driven by what the outcome and impact is. And if we feel that we're having impact in our work and that there's a good point to it and it's worthwhile, then all of us feel better. Like that's just normal. So if we can start to connect the dots more, and it's not that hard to do because we already know, like, what is information that lives in Salesforce? We know who they are. We can probably get some more information to make it a bit more human, but I'm sure that in the discovery calls and the sales process, they probably spoke about their requirements and why they were doing it, because that went into the design of the choices that they made. So, if we can connect all of our work back to the end result, because that's what technology and the internet has enabled us to do. We just haven't done the final part of the loop, which is actually go, okay, great, you've got all that information. P.S. Now tell people about it. We just forgot to do that bit. So let's just finish it off and then, make the loops work.
Very interesting. I mean, I never looked at a screen business, in a way that you create purpose for people, purpose for workers when they, as you mentioned, create a house and they see the people who will live in the house in the future. Recognition for employees, integrating people who are sort of disconnected from our information flow, which we tech and knowledge workers, we take for granted, and we often think, or we often say is too much and they don't have anything. So it's an amazing purpose you have in your organization. Thank you so much for sharing this information and these very interesting thoughts. Where can people find you? Where you normally hang around? I mean, we'll put the links then in the show notes, but where's your primary channel of communication? My
primary channel as an individual is actually LinkedIn professionally. I actually really like LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter, but I kind of stay away from some of the, I think Twitter is too much down its own rabbit hole occasionally. So for me, LinkedIn is a great platform.
Yeah, big time.
I like sharing my thoughts and updates on the product and what we're doing and sharing customer stories there. So contact me on LinkedIn and reach out on LinkedIn and I try and post fairly frequently there. And obviously, if you'd like to kind of find out more about our product and everything, ScreenCloud.com is there. And we actually have quite active Instagram as well, where we can show quite a lot about what we do as well, and also a culture as a company. So but LinkedIn for me and ScreenCloud.com for everything to do with our product and our platform.
Great. Thanks a lot, Mark, for your time today. It was very interesting. And I think it opened the eyes for many people that we should, as knowledge workers, really look at the 80% of people who don't look at a screen all day and integrate them in our communication flow, show gratitude, show recognition, and help them to have a purpose in what they do by providing them with more information. Thanks a lot.